Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Big Code Hours. Not really an episode, just a YouTube video. That's cool. Today we're going to be going over some Python, just like basics. No, it's going to be more than basics. It's just going to be kind of like a rundown on the Python programming language. I feel that some of the videos I've shown, like maybe people, or you guys as my subscribers, like maybe don't know a lot about Python, or just other people who are watching this video are maybe looking for kind of just like I don't know some either a refresher or just trying to completely like learn the language. So yeah, we're just gonna go through some stuff. So let's get started. If you don't know anything about programming, there could be some things that might be kind of confusing, but overall, I'm gonna try to explain the concepts pretty simply and try to go through a lot of stuff with you guys. So um, even if you already know a decent amount, maybe there'll be some helpful things. So essentially, I'm gonna teach you guys some things that are more like specific to Python. Um, just because like if I was just teaching you programming basics, that would kind of be different. I'm more teaching you like Python specific stuff. So we're just going to go through some stuff. Some of the stuff's going to be just programming basics in general, but yeah, let's just get started. All right. So let's start out the first thing. So variables. So essentially the way you define a variable is you can name it like anything you want. It can't start with like a number or something like that, but you could just name it like anything like my variable, and you can't have it start with like certain symbols. So it couldn't start with I think asterisks or percent sign. I don't know. I might be able to start with some of those, but there's like certain characters you can't use to start it. So typically you're just going to use text. A lot of times people will also either use underscores. So if you're saying my variable, you might do my underscore variable or my variable. That's just different ways you want to type it so it's more readable. So let's say my variable equals. So in Python, there's no integer, string. Well, there is, but you don't have to define an integer, a string, or a decimal, or a Boolean value. So you don't have to define those in Python. You can just say whatever. So if you want to say my variable equals hello world, or you could say my variable equals 1, or you could say my variable equals true. And again, true and false in Python are capitalized, and those stand for those are your Boolean values there. So yeah, so essentially like I can make it equal any of those and it just automatically knows what the value is, so I don't have to say like int, or for this one it'd be like boolean. That's what you do in most languages, where you'd say like bool and then like the variable, but you don't have to do that in Python. So let's just start with a variable equals true. Let's just say x equals 1, y equals 5, right? So we have two variables there, two integers, x and a y. And so one of the cool things about Python is that you don't have to use any like braces or any like parentheses or brackets, stuff like that. So you could say if x is less than y, and then you'll put a colon. So anytime you want to end like an if statement, again, so this is an if statement. So if you don't know what that is, essentially you say if and then something right here. So if you could say if 1 equals 1, then it'll do something. So like print hello. So if you don't know what a conditional is, that's what it is. Essentially, it's just a statement saying if 1 is equal to 1, print hello. And as you can see when I ran it down here, it went ahead and it printed hello. Then you would say if 1 equals 2, then print hello. So this is going to evaluate to be false because 1 does not equal 2, therefore it's not going to print hello. So you printed nothing here. So anyway, so you can use the variables instead of those, and you could say like does x equal y? Obviously x doesn't equal y because x is 1 and y equals 5. But if you were to say something like if x is less than y, and then we run it, it's going to print hello down here. I'll move this up a little bit. So yeah, so that's just like how conditionals work. And in Python, you have to have everything like tabbed over. So in other languages, you might use curly brackets and you could just have the print here, or you could have the print here. It wouldn't matter. But in Python, the way you have to do it is you have to have things like indented. So whenever you do something that needs to have a colon, then you're going to need to indent it. So that's if statements, any kind of loop, functions. Those are like the main ones. But essentially anything like that, you're going to put a colon after it, and then you have to indent for the line to signify to the language that, hey, all of this stuff is in the if statement, right? So if I put this right here, like print hi, then or even so it's not going to think that this is in the if statement because this isn't indented. So it's just going to evaluate it to do it every single time. So yeah, so that's a little bit on that. So yeah, so those are if statements, and then we also have, so let's make this a little more clear. So x is less than y, and then what we can do is something called an else if. So essentially what you can do is you can have multiple conditionals in an if statement. So what you can say is if x is less than y, do this. Or you can say pretty much in a way like or, and you would say elif in Python. That's a shortened version of else if. That's what it means. It's like else if. So if x is not less than y, otherwise, right, then do this. So then now it's saying, so if y equals x, then print y is equal to x. Right, and then we can do something finally that is called else. So essentially, if none of these conditions are true, then it's going to print something here. So far we've said if x is less than y, then print x is less than y. Otherwise, if x is not less than y, if they're equal to each other, and you could say if x is equal to y, either way, doesn't matter. So if x equals y, then we print y is equal to x. Right, so if neither of those are true, so essentially that would mean if x was greater than y, right, because we've already accounted for if it's less than, and we've accounted for if it's equal to. So the last option would be if it's greater than, then we would say print x is greater than y. So now we can like run this and watch what happens. So right now x is 1 and y is 5, so x is less than y, so it's going to print, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so it's going to print x is less than y. All right, so if we run it again and change this to 5, so now they're equal to each other, it's going to hit this block. It's going to say, no, x is not less than y. So then it's going to go this else if block. Let's say y is equal to x, right? So y is equal to x. And now if we were to make it x equal to 6, then it's going to look here and say, oh, x is not less than y. X is not equal to y, therefore x is greater than y, right? Or is greater than. Right, so x is greater than y. So that's just like a quick example of how conditionals work. And you can really put anything in here. Anything that can be evaluated to a true or false statement can be put in here. So for instance, my variable equals true. If we wanted to, we could, here, let's get rid of this. If we wanted to, we could say if my variable equals true, then print my variable is equal to true, right? And what's cool about this is, and most pretty much every programming language, is you don't actually have to add this equals equals true. We can do is you can just say if my variable, and then it'll automatically recognize the value of my variable because my variable is equal to true. So it takes that value and puts it right here. So it just says if true, then my variable is equal to true, right? So it would be the same thing as saying if true, right? And then if you said if false, then look, it actually grade this out on Visual Studio Code because it knows that no matter what I put in here, if I say if false, it's never going to run it. So it's pretty much telling me like, hey, don't do that because that's dumb. But obviously if we run that, nothing is going to happen because it's false. So yeah, so that's how like those conditionals work. Hopefully that is helpful and that made sense. I'm also going to go through you guys functions in Python. So if you don't know what a function is, essentially it's a little piece of code that you can write, and then you can plug in values to it, and you can kind of run it again and again in your program. Let's say we had a function called like add two numbers, right? Let's say we're going to use that function like 20 times in our code, or we're going to use that function like in some sort of loop or something. We're not going to want to like copy and paste that code 20 times. Instead, we'll make a function, and that function will run it instead. So this is how you make a function. You say def, DEF, that stands for define, and then you can name it whatever you want. So I'm going to say add two numbers, and let's say, then you get to make your parameters. So you can say num1 and num2. And I'll show you what those kind of do in a sec. But essentially, you'll be taking that num1. So let's just do this first. So let's print num1, num2. And in Python, something you can do with your print statements is if you do a comma, it automatically prints this as a string. You won't have to cast it to, so since it's an integer, normally if you do a print or some output to the screen, right, you're gonna have to cast it as a string. But if you use a comma in Python, you don't have to cast it to a string. It automatically casts it on its own. And so it's gonna print num1 space num2. So that's like kind of cool, something cool about Python there. I don't necessarily use that comma like a lot, but that is something you can use if you want to. So add two numbers. So let's add our x and our y, right? X is 6 and y is 5. So x comma y. All right, so what's this doing? So essentially it's putting x in the num1 spot, and it's putting y in the num2 spot, and then this add two numbers function takes the value of x and sets num1 equal to the value of x, and then it sets num2 equal to the value of y. And now this function uses num1 and num2 as the variables, but they are equal to these values. So that's like what you can do is you can load up parameters. So if I were to put another, let's say we also have a z, right? Let's say z equals 0. If I was to put z here, it's going to give me an error. Let's just run it and see that. This is add two numbers, takes two positional arguments, but 3 were given. All right, that's because this takes 2 arguments, right? But I gave 3, so it's expecting 2. So let's put 2 in there and see what it does. All right. So let's run that. So essentially, it just prints 5 space 6. So this is the value, or sorry, 6 space 5. I somehow said that backwards, even though I'm really reading it. But so 6 space 5, x equals 6, y equals 5. It prints out 6, and then 5 because it assigned x to num1 and y to num2. So yeah, that's pretty easy, but let's actually like do what this is saying, right? I was wanting to show you just how it works, but let's do it. It's actually saying. So in functions, typically, you actually will say return because you usually run a function because you want it to return a value. Because a lot of times you'll set that function equal to a variable, or you'll put it in a conditional, or like like an if statement or something. So typically you want it to actually return a value to you, because if you do print, then that's just outputting it on the screen. It's not actually equaling a value, it's just equaling nothing. So typically what you want to say is return. So let's say return num1 plus num2. All right, so since it knows that they're integers, this will automatically do a mathematical expression. If they were strings, Python would actually automatically combine these strings as well. So it's just able to know that. That's just like how Python works. You don't have to define the type of variable. It'll just automatically know and run whatever it's supposed to run. So if we're saying return num1 and num2, let's just run that and see what happens. Okay, so it outputted nothing on the screen, right? And that might be confusing. You might be like, why did it not output anything on the screen? It's because what we're doing is we're returning a value. So this is equaling num1 plus 1, 2, but we're not outputting it on the screen anymore because return doesn't output it on the screen. What it does is it has this send an output out of it in a way, if that makes sense. So it's outputting the two numbers added together, but if we want it to go on the screen, we have to say print. All right, so we're going to print, and then we're going to run whatever's in this. So we're going to run this function, right? And whatever that function equals is going to get printed on the screen. Right, so 11. So it added 6, and then it added 5, and then it printed it out on the screen. Okay, so let's make it like a little bit more in depth. So let's say that someone enters something that isn't a string, right? Or something that isn't a number. Let's say they enter a string. So what we can do if we want is we can use an if statement here, right? And if you want, you can use parentheses and put your stuff in your parentheses, or you can not include parentheses, whatever is like more natural to you. All right, but let's say if, and then let's indent this return, right, to put it in the if block, and then this will be our conditional right here. So let's say, and then I'm going to show you a keyword, so type this type function essentially will return the type that the variable is, or any object. You can put any object in there, but so if we take num1, it's going to return the type of num1. So essentially the type is going to be like bool, int, str, which is string in Python, it's abbreviation. It might be a float, it could be a double. There's a lot of different types that it could be, right? It could be an object type, so it could equal a class variable, something like that. Again, lots of different things it can equal, but for here, we want it to equal an integer. All right, we're adding two numbers, so if someone inputs strings into this, we want to be able to tell them, hey, don't put strings in, they need to be numbers. So what we're going to say is if type num1 equals int, and then we're going to say and. So in Python, this is how you would say an and expression. So both of these things that we're saying have to be true, right? So we're saying and. If we said or, then either expression could be true. So we're also going to say num2 equals int. So if either one of these were an integer, then it would run this. But we don't want that. We want them both to be integers for it to run. So we're going to say and. So these conditions must both be true for it to run this block. So obviously that's going to run because these are both integers. So then it printed out 11 again for us when I ran it. So yeah, but for instance, let's say we entered a string, right? Let's do an else expression, and we're going to say return you did not enter two numbers, right? Let's go ahead and run that. Oh, actually, let's change this to a string, right? So now 6 is a string. So before, if we were to run this, it would have just given us some error saying you can't combine a string and an integer, right? But now it's going to check and see that num1 isn't an int, and it's going to get that return instead. So you did not enter two numbers. All right, so that's kind of combining things. That's combining the variables with the function with the if statements, okay? And there's like lots of really cool things that you can do. For instance, you could make a function that does like complex math equations or something like that. So for instance, let's just do that real quick. So let's grab all right, let's say circle all right, let's get the equation for the diameter of a circle. So it's so the diameter is 2 times the radius. Okay, I probably should have remembered that, but I didn't. So I also spelled diameter wrong. That's okay. So diameter is 2 times the radius. So let's change this up, right? So let's call this get diameter, and we're going to take in the radius. Let's get rid of all that stuff. Okay. So yeah, so this is a really easy one. So we're just going to say return 2 times radius, right? And then we will just go ahead and print the get diameter. Yeah, let's go ahead and print the get diameter function. So let's say we just put in like, let's say 16, right, is the radius, then it's going to return 30 for the diameter. So again, that's just like a simple expression. Or if we wanted to do like Pythagorean theorem, right, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So Pythagorean theorem, and we're going to return a, and this is how you do a square root in, or to the power of something in Python. So a squared plus b squared here, and we won't have c. Let's do a and b. All right, so let's say we're trying to get the Pythagorean theorem, and then we'll want, oh yeah, so let's go ahead and show you how imports work. Okay, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? So if you're thinking about the formula like this equals c squared, let's make this comment. So essentially a squared plus b squared, let's say it equals what? Let's say it equals like 10 or something like that. Okay, equals c squared. So now we're still going to have to take the square root of this side in order to actually get c, right? If you know how math works. That's how math works. So in order to do a square root, we're going to have to import something called math. So this is how you import modules in Python. There's certain things that you can't do, or you could do on your own, but they might be really hard. So instead you import something to do it for you. So for instance, math is a built-in module to Python. So we're going to go ahead and import math. And what we can say is math dot square root. Right, so then doing a square root, you could do it programmatically on your own, but it's a lot easier to just import a module that can do it for you. So essentially now if we add a and b, then it should give us c. So right, let's do 3 and 4 for a and b. Oops. And if you don't know, a 3 4 5 triangle is kind of like known for, I don't know, it's just like special or something in math. Anyways, any combination of like 3, 4, and 5 in a triangle, you can always like tell really easily what the Pythagorean theorem is because you can do mental math with the 3, 4, and the 5. That doesn't matter. Who cares? So essentially we put 3 and we put 4 in there, and just, I'm saying that because like 5 would be what we would expect to get, and it was. So let's say we put like 10 and 12 in there, right? So you can put any number in here, and whenever you run it, right, it's gonna put it in a decimal output too, which is great. So it turns it into a float or a double or whatever. So yeah, and then you could use this multiple times, right? So if you wanted to print like, let's say you want to do 1 and 12 and do like big numbers, right? Do like really big numbers if we wanted to. And it's going to be able to get us each of those values and see how quick it does it. I mean, way faster than we'd obviously be able to do it. And it gives you all those numbers, which is really cool. So yeah, so that's a little bit on functions. Now let me show you a few things that are just kind of like cool to Python. I think one of them would be one-line if statements. So this is something, oh actually, let's go over loops first, so just so you have that. So essentially loops, if you don't know anything about loops, there's really two kinds of loops, and it's a while loop, and then there's also a for loop. So a while loop essentially says, while true, do something. Right, so while this condition is true, then print hello world. So if we run this, we're going to see that it just repeatedly prints hello world again and again, because it's saying while true, and this word true is the key word, so it's a Boolean, and so it's never going to actually stop. It just keeps running forever and ever and ever. So we could say like while, what a lot of times people use this for is they'll say like while t equals, let's say 0, and then yeah, and then they'll say while t is less than 10, t plus equals 1. You can say plus equals. Essentially, a lot of times beginners will think like to add 1 to t, right? They say, oh, t plus 1. It's like, well, actually that doesn't actually assign anything to t. You have to say t equals t plus 1, right? And a shortened version of saying that is just plus equals. So yeah. So we're just going to do that, and essentially this is going to run it 10 times. Oops. So yeah, so it just runs it, as you can see, it started here and it ended here. So it just ran it 10 times, printing hello world. If we wanted to, we could say t plus equals 1, and then we could say print t. So it prints 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So essentially it adds 1 to t, so when it runs the first time, it equals 0. Then it adds 1 to t, so now it equals 1, runs, now it equals 2, 3, 4, so on, until it gets to become 10. And 10 is no longer less than 10, so it stops running and it doesn't run that. So that's how while loops work. Essentially, you could put anything in here and say, as long as this is true, do this. And so yeah, that's kind of cool. And then for loops for loops in Python are, I would say, mainly used to interact with lists. So let's just use a list for this example. Or let's even say groceries equals apple, banana, oops. I need to learn how to spell my fruit. Milk, and orange juice. I learned how to spell more than just fruit names, I think. I think I just need to learn how to spell. So in Python, so in a lot of languages this is different. I think this annoys some people, but in Python what you can actually say is you can iterate directly through the list. So you can just say for item in groceries, print item. So it's kind of cool about Python. Sometimes it's like a little annoying if you're wanting to do specific things. We don't need to get into that right now, but it is cool the way that it iterates through lists. So essentially, by saying for item in groceries, it'll say for each item that's in this list, print it. So if you watch, printed apple, banana, milk, and orange juice. So let's just say we had a variable called apple, and we put it in here instead. You might think it's going to break because this isn't a list anymore, so how's it's going to run? Or you might think it's just going to print like apple or something like that. Well, it's actually going to go through to each character and print each character because it views this string as just a list of characters, because that's what a string actually is. So as you can see, it prints A, P, P, L, E. So it does that with this for loop right here. So for loop can be really useful. You could, for instance, you can also say for num in range 100, print num, and it's going to add, or it's going to print out, well, it's going to start at 0, because the range starts at 0, but it does do 100 numbers. It goes from 0 to 99. This would be something really easy that you could do for like factorials. So if you wanted to say like factorial, essentially a factorial, it's just a number that, so if it's 10 and you want to get the factorial, then it would just be 10 plus 9, or 10 times 9 times 8 times 7, all the way to 1. So you could say from range 1 to factorial. You could say total equals num times total. So essentially this is going to go through, it's going to start at 1, but it's going to go 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8 to 9 and 10. So it's going to multiply them all by each other. And if we want to print out total at the end, we can do that. And it probably messed up because I set total equal to the wrong value. But, oh. Maybe you can't, no, never mind. You probably couldn't do a factorial, like, or maybe you could. I don't, that might actually be 10 factorial. I might have, like, not done my math here correctly. But anyways, the point is that you can essentially go through a range of numbers, and each time you go through that range, you're doing something with that item. So anyways, you can use it for numbers, you can use it for lists. Regardless of my lack of math skills, you can see that that's just kind of like how that stuff works. So something else we might want to look at is, actually before we get into anything like really that complicated, is just how like strings work. So doing stuff with strings. So let's say my string, let's set it equal to big code hours is cool, right? And you should like and subscribe. Thank you. Okay, so let's actually, I gotta get this grammar right. Okay, so big coders are cool and you should like and subscribe. Thank you. And so this is how you can like manipulate strings. So I'm gonna do print and let's say my string. And so if you want to grab a specific spot of the string, you can grab it through an index like this. So 0, right? Lists and programming, 0 is your first index. So 0 would grab that B right there. So it grabs the B. Let's say I wanted to go from the B to I don't know, somewhere like more in the middle. We could say from 0 to 15. So go from the very first element or the very first item to the 15th um, item or 15th character. So that was, I didn't even plan that, but it just is big code hours, of course, right? I love me some big code hours. I don't know about you, but anyways, yeah. So it just grabs it based on index. You can also do negative indexes. So -1 is going to grab the last item, which is going to be this period. You can see it grabbed the period right there. And then you could also say like from, you could say from like 10 to -1. So it's going to grab from the 10th index to the -1st index. So, and again, this is, it's not, I forgot what the word is, but essentially like it doesn't include, it's exclusive. So it's not going to include this -1. It's not going to include this element. It's going to grab the elements in between them. So yeah, so ours is cool. So it grabs this part, and then it grabbed all the way to subscribe, and it said you should like and subscribe. Anyways, so so yeah, a trick that's kind of cool. Is if you go like this, it'll put the string in reverse. So as you see, it's so that's big code hours is cool. It looks like a really different language, but that's why you can reverse a string, which is helpful a lot of times in Python. Um, yeah, and then there's just a lot of other things you can do. You can say dot lower. That'll make it lowercase. You can say dot upper. That'll make it uppercase. You can say dot is upper. That would, or I don't actually. You might need to do that one a different way. Yeah. Oh, there's not a underscore in there. I just like putting underscores apparently. Okay, so dot is upper would return you a Boolean value if the whole thing is uppercase or not. I'll say dot replace. This is like really helpful. So you can essentially grab an item and replace it with something. So let's grab all of the O's and replace them with capital O's. Why not? So that's a lowercase o and that's a capital O, just so you know. So you can see big code hours is cool. You just like, okay. Anyway, so yeah. So you can like replace things. There's a lot of different string manipulation methods that you can do. So you can always look those up too, but I'm just showing you. There's a lot of stuff you can do with Python really easily. There's a lot of methods, a lot of modules that you can import that make your life a lot easier. So yeah, yeah, and then I might also show you guys just like dictionaries, because dictionaries are really helpful in Python. So say my dictionary equals, so dictionary is going to be in curly braces, and essentially it's going to have a key and a value. So you're going to say key, and then you're going to say colon, and then whatever the value is. Right, so essentially this dictionary, and let's just print this. Right, so this dictionary equals key, and then key's key is value. So if you wanted to, you could say something like, you could do like a person's account number and then, right, like maybe their information. So what you can do is you can actually like nest dictionaries. So let's say we have an account number of someone, and then you can actually set the dictionary equal to another dictionary, and then you could say like name, oops. All right, so you could say like their name. Let's do Justin. Oops, not a. You do comma to separate these. Say like last name. You guys have already seen this, but I don't know which to put my last name on here. Justin Cool. That's my last name. You could say like, I don't know. Let's just do that. So that's like, let's say that's like their account. And then you separate these by commas as well. This is helpful because it's like a good way of storing data in Python. Because a lot of times you might want to grab things by, let's say like something like an account number. Bob, his last name. You know how we love Big Bob around here. So Big Bob, this is his last name. We love Big Bob. So if I were to print that out, you're going to see here's the account number. The name is Justin. Last name is Justin Cool. Here's another account number. The name is Bob. The last name is Big Bob. So dictionaries are helpful. You can actually do a for loop on a dictionary and say for key comma value in my dictionary, and then you can say dot items. This will actually grab each item with the value. Okay, so let's just print this so you can like see immediately how it looks. Let's run that again. Okay, so essentially you're grabbing the key and then the value that that key equals for each item in the dictionary. So this is the key right here, and then the value is equal to whatever that key equals. So that's printing out right here. So for key and value in the dictionary items, print the key and value. So that's what it's doing right here. It's grabbing that number. So for instance, if it was a login system, right, you might have maybe this would be like their ID or something. You could have a username and password. And you could say if the username and password, so you could loop through this and look at each like username and password, and then if it is correct, then you make a session for that ID, something like that. That's, you probably wouldn't actually want to use Python that way, but that's like the concept of what's happening here. So yeah, I try not to make this video like crazy long. So yeah, it's like 36 minutes. So hopefully I went through like all the main things of Python. There's actually like ended up leaving a lot of stuff out because I'm realizing that this is just like so long. If you guys want to see more stuff, like more advanced things, or how to do like object-oriented programming, like classes, how to do, you probably, if you don't know the terms I'm about to say, that's okay, but how to do like list comprehension, how to do, I don't know, like some more bigger things, how to like make maybe a module that you could import, how to do command line arguments. Trying to think of different things that'd be helpful. There's lots of stuff I can show you guys if you're wanting to see it and kind of just get how it works. Python's a great language. It's really powerful. It's actually, I think people have this idea that it's like super new and stuff. Python's been around for like years. It really has. It's a decently old language. But there's lots of great parts about it that make it, in some ways, beginner friendly. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like quote unquote easier, because programming is programming, but it makes it easier to do more complex things, I guess. It's a very powerful language. So yeah, guys, as always, I appreciate you so much for watching this video. I love your support. All of my subscribers, you are awesome. Yeah, please let me know in the future any ideas you want to see, anything Python, any other kind of video ideas. Just let me know. Let me know what you want. And yeah, I appreciate you sticking with me and watching this video. So have a great day.